Welcome back. My name is David Rendell, and this is the Imperfectionist Podcast. We have a special guest today. His name is Stosh Walsh. I'll tell you a little bit more about him, but first, Stosh, why don't you tell them all the ways that people say your name wrong just to get us started?
Yeah, my favorite one is the one that I get in the mail. Srosh. So R instead of T. And they're like, Srosh, we have a special offer for you. And I'm like, yeah, I can't wait to hear it since you know me so well.
I don't think I knew Srosh. I don't
Yes,
think I knew that one because
Srosh.
that's something somebody wouldn't say.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
mail.
only for the mail. Yeah. But I get
Yeah.
Josh and Scott and Scotch once in a while. It's all kinds of
Scotch.
yeah, Scotch.
That's not too far off with you.
No, it's not. I love Scotch.
Yeah.
I just don't like to be
Yeah.
called that.
Yeah. I think you also get slosh,
Yeah, I've gotten
SLOSH.
called a lot of different weird things over time. And
Yeah.
it's not like when
Yeah.
I go speak places, I just go, listen, I'm like Bono, Cher. You don't know anybody else named Stosh, so I don't really need a last name, right?
Yeah.
Every time I do that, one person comes up and is like, I know somebody named Stosh. Or I went to elementary school with somebody named Stosh. Awesome. Lovely
Perfect.
that you can say
Perfect.
it right. Super.
So, the reason Stosh is joining us, this is the Imperfectionist Podcast. We're talking about how weaknesses can also be strengths. And Stosh is one of my best friends, but that's not why I had him on. We've known each other since college at Judson College, a little tiny school in Elgin, Illinois, where we met in the early 90s. But the real reason Stosh is on this show is because Stosh worked at Gallup. And that's going to be kind of our theme today. They're the inventors, creators of the Strengths Finder assessment, which is now called Clifton Strengths, I believe. And so our quotes of the day and our book of the day is going to be Now Discover Your Strengths. So we're going to talk about that. Um, our quote of the day is about strengths. So I wanted to bring Stosh on as kind of an expert in that. He also does a presentation about why fixing weaknesses doesn't work. And so he's a fantastic person to start with. So, Stosh, I'm going to start us with our quote of the day and then get your reaction to that because this kind of blew my mind when I heard it the first time. I mean, the development of Freak Factor, which we've talked about on the podcast before, was really, it happened while I was listening to Now Discover Your Strengths on audio. Um, and I'd recently been in situations where it seemed to be working well when I was standing up talking and doing my own thing, and I'd been told my whole life to sit still, be quiet, and do what I was told. So Now Discover Your Strengths talks about positive psychology, focus on what's working instead of what's broken, which is a huge change. I studied psychology, and most psychology is find what's wrong and fix it, find the disorder and diagnose it, and try to repair it in some way. So I'd never heard of positive psychology. Then they're saying focus on strengths instead of trying to fix weaknesses. And all I'd ever heard from parents, teachers, and employers was fix weaknesses. And so I remember one of the quotes that really stuck with me um, from Tom Rath. He says, "You cannot be anything you want to be." So even that is not what we normally hear, right? Anything you want to be. No, Iron Man says there's no limitations. It's like, yeah, there are. Nobody's ever going to do an Iron Man in 5 minutes. Like there's plenty of limitations. But he says you cannot be anything you want to be, but you can be a whole lot more of what you already are. And again, that valuing of what you already are instead of constantly fighting it and trying to fix it and try to change it was just, absolutely mind blowing for me. So that's why that quote was so important to me, was to say, okay, it's not sort of about being anything. It's about discovering who I am and trying to build on that foundation. And that was really, really powerful for me. So that's the quote of the day, quote of the week for this episode. Stosh, what's your reaction to that or your perspective on that? Because I know you worked there and I'm sure you heard that a lot more times than I did.
Yeah, and I said it a lot of times too, right? So yeah, that
From now
whole
on, I'll say that quote and I'll say Stosh Walsh.
yeah, no. In fact, I'm not even sure Tom said that. It might have been Kurt Liesfeld. It might have been Don Clifton. I don't want to be negative about Tom. Tom's
Well, I
great.
think a bunch of people have probably said it, and it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, where
it
was the
kind of
first
became
time?
legend, right?
Because
Yeah,
I'm almost certain I'm almost certain it was in here somewhere, and Tom Rath isn't one of the authors of
Right.
Now Discover Your
Right.
Strengths. But I think he did Strengths Finder 2.0, which is a follow up book and pretty much sort of the same thing with a different title, related to doing the Strengths Finder assessment. And so he may kind of recover some of that, say
Yeah.
some of those same things.
Yeah. And that the philosophy hasn't changed and never is going to. So that's part of what makes it, I think, useful, worthwhile. But
Yeah.
I mean, my reaction to that quote is that it's like the C.S. Lewis quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's like the C.S. Lewis quote that basically says something about, like you have on offer a holiday by the beach and you're playing around in a puddle, kind of thing. And that's the same thing that this is saying to me. It's like there's a gold mine inside you, and there is an unlimited supply of that gold that you can mine and use and spend and make your life and the lives around you and your community and your work and everything else that's important to you more rich as a result of mining in that space. And instead we're trying to do all this other weakness fixing and whatever else we're trying to do, and it just doesn't make any sense, like that. And it goes along with another thing that we used to say a lot, and I'm pretty sure this one was started with Kurt, was don't try to put in what was left out. Try to draw out what was left in. That's hard enough. And I didn't have the privilege of working at Gallup when Don was there. He passed away before I started working there. But like one of the things that got repeated a lot about what he said was, having a top five in your strengths is a lifelong project all by itself. And I think sometimes we have this idea like we need to just go find the next thing. And really you just need to get deeper and deeper into who you already are. Because I mean, you like me, I mean, you and I are the same. We've known about this philosophy for a long time. I mean, that book came out in, I think, 1999, 2000, maybe. I read it in 2001 or 2002.
Oh yeah.
And started working for Gallup in 2006. So
yeah, I mean, I moved here to North Carolina in 2004, and I know I was still living in Wisconsin when I listened to this. I was in a car wash. Like I still, I remember exactly when I had the question. I'm learning about this strengths thing. I wonder if our biggest weaknesses can be the same thing. I wonder if the worst things about me are also the best things about me. That's when and I remember I was in a car wash and I'd recently spoken at a Chamber of Commerce event, and I'm like, they really liked it. I really liked it, but I was standing up and talking, and my whole life people told me to sit still and be quiet, sit down, get out of the way, don't make it about you, stop trying to be the center of attention. And I was like, wait a second. So yeah, I mean, it's been 20 something years. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still have insights on a regular basis about my strengths.
Yeah.
Right. Having taught it all over the place, having coached hundreds and probably thousands of people on their strengths. And it is a lifelong project. And so to me, it's this sort of relentless pursuit of how much better you can be at who you're supposed to be and who you are.
But you won't do that, though, if you believe, and let's keep your analogy going. There's this endless gold mine, and you're like, no silver.
Yeah, right.
Everybody else has got silver.
Yeah.
And I'm over here with just gold. This is BS. I'm going to go. I need to find some silver. Right. So it's that you're never going to mine what you have. You're never going to value it and appreciate it in the same way. And you're certainly not going to use it when you're busy thinking this isn't much, or it's not very good, or it won't take me very far. What I really need is, go fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
Some other thing that people have told me I need, or that I think that would be better if I was like that.
Yeah.
And so until you can get people to believe that first part, and that's really, that first quote about, you can't be anything you want to be, a lot of people would just shut it down where they're sure you can. And that's where it all stops, because then the goal is to just go magically turn into this thing that you've decided, instead of saying, I'm 6'6", I'm never going to be a jockey. No, believe in yourself, and maybe they'll make a movie about you someday.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's bad advice. Repeat I got half of it, and I've heard you say it before. And I've heard the quote before, but I'm forgetting the second part. You said, "Don't try to put in what was left out." Say the rest of that again for everybody.
Try to draw out what was left in.
That's
That's
the part
hard
I was
enough.
missing. Yeah, try to draw out what was left in. Yeah,
And I mean, Dave, a big part of that, so much of it we miss, and I think the strengths movement in general misses this sometimes, is it has to be about performance, right? So that whole notion of like, well, I don't have any gold, I've got, or I want silver or whatever, like that part of that problem is we're looking at that and saying that I want this or I want that. And there's this aspirational or even inspirational sometimes, like, oh, like you just focus on your strengths and whatever. Like strengths isn't the goal, performance is.
yeah.
Right? Like because you're 6'6", you're not going to be a good jockey. It's not that you couldn't be a jockey. You could be a jockey.
You could ride. No, that's the thing. You could ride horses.
Be horrible, right?
Right. You could ride horses, but not be. Well, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, fine. Like you're not the kind of body type. You're not the kind.
That's
like
right.
there's a lot of problems with you being a top level jockey. It's not just
what I'm realizing is
jockey.
There's a look at.
That's awesome.
My pink cowboy hat that I got from a speech I did in Fort Worth, Texas. I realized this is a hilarious one. I could never be a jockey.
You
I
could
be
a cowboy, Dave,
though,
but you can't be a jockey. Yeah, that's exactly
down
right.
here, no jockey, but up here, maybe.
Right, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that's really.
Well, that's good. You could do it, but you're going to do it at a lower level.
Right, and that notion of where do we spend our time? Like, are we mining in the areas where we're going to find gold, or are we just digging up rocks? And that digging up rocks is the performance aspect of it. Like, who cares if you spend all that time and no performance happened as a result? And that's one of the biggest myths about weakness fixing. Like, you're going to somehow get to success in that space. Well, fixing weaknesses at best leads to passable performance. It leads to average. Right? Like, I mean, when I led seminars on this, one of the things I always used to ask people was, okay, tell me the performance difference between somebody who fails a class and somebody who passes with a D- because they passed the final. What's the performance difference? But we're sending one of those people through to the next level, and one of them's having to repeat it. What's the performance?
Yeah, but you don't want either one of those people working for you in that
absolutely not
subject area.
Nope.
Yeah.
And it's like you talked about, like you had that epiphany when you went and spoke at the chamber, like, oh, hold on a second, right? Like one of the things that I remember most vividly about my journey in strengths and understanding strengths was like, I'd actually started working at Gallup, and I was like collecting stories and different metaphors and pictures for not just the 34 themes, but also just how to use them and why it's important and trying to get people's attention about it. And I realized when I was riding on a train. I live in Chicagoland and have for a long time. I keep saying driving. I was riding on a metro train. Speaking of things that you can't do.
Hey, if you were driving the train,
no, that would be bad for everyone, right? So I'm riding on this train, and there's a point in Chicago where the suburb that I'm in, the train goes over the intersection where the Kennedy Expressway and the Eisenhower Expressway merge, and it's about 12 lanes of traffic.
Stosh lives in the Chicagoland area.
And it is just a massive pile of cars 90% of the time. And the train that I'm on goes over that twice a day, and it goes over it multiple times a day in trains that I'm not on, right? And I had this epiphany in that moment, and I went, I as you know, I majored in education as an undergrad. I was an English education major. And so for several years, I taught school and, taught literature and writing and all that sort of stuff. And I went, and I was pretty good at it, don't get me wrong, but I immediately had this moment of, as I cross this bridge daily on this train, I don't care whether the person who designed this bridge has ever read a novel by Henry James. I don't care if they spell a bunch of words wrong in their emails. I don't care if their punctuation is horrible. I don't even care if that person can spell their own name, right? What I really, really want, what my life depends on every single day, is whether this person had the best training in engineering and in, metallurgy or whatever it is that helps them understand this is the weight-bearing load of this steel, and here's how to build it so that it's going to last for 200 years, and it's going to take the weight of all these engine cars and all these people whose lives depend on going over this bridge multiple times a day, right?
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't care less from a performance perspective what else that person is or isn't good at. What I care about is this is what you do at a world-class level, and you use your strengths to make that happen. And literally millions of other people couldn't have done that.
Yeah, and what you really hope is that the person is, and this is why I called the book The Freak Factor, you really hope the person is a gigantic weirdo about bridges.
Yes.
You hope the
Yes.
person, since they were born, was reading books about bridges and watching documentaries about bridges and going on trips just to see bridges. You want the person who's obsessed
Yep.
with bridges, and that person who's obsessed with bridges is probably not a liberal arts major somewhere
Yeah.
looking. You don't need them to be what you're hoping, and again, it's fine if you want to have broad interests, but when that person's building that bridge, designing that bridge, engineering that bridge, I'd like to know they've seen 17,000 bridges. They've seen up close five that have completely failed. They've watched the stories, they've read the scientific inquiry into what happened with the failures. I hope the person who inspects the bridges, there's been some spectacular, and I mean that in a negative, some terrible, horrible bridge failures over the time, especially in America here. I know there's one famous one in Tacoma. There's some crazy video if you ever look that up online. I want the person inspecting. There was a failure of one, I think, that went over the Mississippi Bridge in Minnesota that cost some people their lives. Um, I want the person even doing the inspections to not be like, it's inspection day. And like you said, I'm going to get a D minus on my inspections, but I'm not going to get fired.
Yeah.
No, I want the person who literally wants to be there, right? They're obsessed with bridges. They love bridges. They love looking at how things are wearing and what isn't wearing. And they understand the physics and they understand the angles and they understand the materials. They're a weirdo about concrete. They're a weirdo about steel. They're a weirdo about bolts. They're a weirdo about weather, right? But
Yep.
we don't really teach people to be those kind of weirdos. In fact, we'd probably tell them not to be, and we tell them to calm down and balance it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love that example. I never, but that's also something we talk about in Freak Factor, which is appreciation, valuing people who are different from you, right? Instead
Yeah.
of saying you're no good because you don't spell well, you're no good because you don't read well, you're no good because you don't know this 18th century British literature. It's everybody doesn't need to be. And that's one of the lies of school, right? Kind of everybody does need to know that. Everybody does need to have a broad, and that's, I think, what makes it hard for people to not fix weaknesses as well. There's so many things we could talk about. Um, let's let's do this. One of the whole idea of Freak Factor is that weaknesses are also strengths, and that you don't need to fix them, and you should actually flaunt them. And we've talked about that on past episodes. You have a whole presentation on why fixing weaknesses doesn't work. Why don't we do this? Why don't you tell people a little bit about what you're doing now? We told them you used to work at Gallup. We told them where you went to school, but we haven't told them what you're up to now. Why don't you tell them a little bit about what you're up to now? And then, you know, almost in presentation style, and maybe I'll jump in a little bit, but kind of talk us through what are the main reasons why, weakness fixing doesn't work, and what are the things you do to try to convey that to people.
Yeah. So what I do now, I left Gallup in 2014, I guess. So it's been a while, and actually joined a client and ran learning and organizational development for the largest credit union in Illinois for a little while. And then after that, I went out on my own with a little brief stint at another leadership development firm over the course of that time. But I've been on my own, running my own business called Constant Organizational Development since 2016. And so anything that falls under that broad organizational development umbrella, whether that's strengths development on an individual or a corporate level, as well as selection, developing managers, rewriting job descriptions, all that sort of stuff, helping organizations become more performance oriented by getting people things right, in essence, is what I do now.
Yeah. So you have a talk I think that's what it's called, is basically like why weakness fixing doesn't work, or you can tell them the exact title. Kind of talk us
Yeah.
through what are the main points of that? What are the myths around that? For people who are listening again, who are like, well, maybe I can be whatever I want to be. And you do have to try to put in what was left out. What if somebody can't? I mean, I heard a wild story. I'll tell you, the other day I was listening to a book about the people who trying trying to see if I have it right here. The people who sequenced the human genome. I'm going to move out of frame here for a second, which I'm probably not supposed to do. But there was an amazing story in that book. Yeah, it's called Codebreaker, The Codebreaker, by Walter Isaacson. And he was talking about what you can do and what you can't do. Yeah, I've got it marked right here. And this couple that was deaf, they needed a sperm donor in order to conceive. They weren't able to conceive on their own, and they were deaf. And they found a donor who had genetic deafness because they were deaf, and they wanted their child to be deaf. And a lot of people would think that's crazy, and some people still will. But what he said was they consider their deafness to be part of who they are rather than something to be cured. And they wanted a child who would be part of that identity. And so then people, condemned them for inflicting a disability on a child. But then the people in the deaf community were like, that's amazing. But I mean, that's a wild example of somebody who was like, I can't hear, but there's nothing left out.
Yeah.
This is my life, and I have my language, and I can communicate with people and move my way through the world. And I don't think I'm less than. So this happens on a, but that's a hard thing. Don't try to put in what was left out. I got some things I want to put in. So for people who are still, and again, we've been taught this by our parents, our teachers, and our employers. For people who are still trying to fix them, they're trying to get other people to fix their weaknesses. Talk us through kind of that, the outline of what you try to share in the weakness fixing not working.
So the biggest thing is, as like I mentioned earlier, it's about performance. It's about success. So when I ask people to do is to think back about the things that they were the most successful in, the most proud of, the most they got the most credit for, or good feedback on, or accolades about, or anything like that, and then talk about, like, was that based on something that you did as a matter of talent, like a naturally recurring pattern, thought, feeling, behavior, or is that something that you worked so hard at that you were really bad at, and then you all of a sudden got good at? Right?
You turned it around.
And most people, as you think, if they really think about it and they're honest with themselves, they can talk about a story how they were successful at this kind of thing even when they were a lot younger. Right? So I've been good at this since I was 7 or 8 years old.
Always, right? Yeah, right? Like as long as I can remember, I've been good at talking to people, or I've been an athlete, or
right, exactly. And so it's this idea of, how do you, again, it's that gold mine thing. How do you dig for and unearth the things that have always been there that you just maybe didn't realize you could apply in a different situation or a different way that can help you be successful? So the irony of a talk about weakness fixing is it's mostly about strengths, right? And so, we talk about,
people won't build on their strengths. I mean, we only have limited time, energy, and resources. People won't build on their strengths when they're busy fixing their weaknesses.
Yeah. And so, I learned this activity at Gallup. It's one of my favorites still to do when I'm talking about strengths with a group of people. It's this handwriting challenge, right? So where you give somebody 30 seconds to write down their name as they would endorse a credit card receipt as many times as they can in 30 seconds, right? And you say, okay, at the end, we're going to be judged on quality and quantity. And so then you say, okay, 3, 2, 1, go. And you let them start doing it. And then you say, oh, sorry, I forgot. You need to do this with your non-dominant hand. Yep. And the groans that go up in the room. I mean, I've heard swear words lots of times, because they're like, and then you say, okay, so 30 seconds, non-dominant hand, same rules, right? And you give them 30 seconds and people are just like,
it's a visceral thing.
Yeah. And so then you're
all of a sudden thinking about, this is my non-dominant hand. All of a sudden you're thinking about and fighting with something that you could almost do blindly.
Right. And so we ask the question then, how did that feel? Right? What was that experience like? And so immediately people start saying, well, it was awkward. It was difficult. It didn't make sense. And then I say, did any of you have to think about how you formed the letters? Almost every hand goes up. Did any of you think about, you actually had to think about how to spell your name? A bunch of hands go up. Seriously, right? Seriously. Yeah. I've done this exercise hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Hands go up. And then you say, okay, so let's look around, jury of your peers, right? How's the quality around you? And people start laughing, right? They're like, this is ridiculous. Like this, it's horrible. Now, there's always somebody in the room that their signatures look exactly the same on both sides. Like whatever, fine. But like it's just
Well,
it's
that's
bad.
because it was so wildly
The
sloppy
quality
with the
is
other
bad.
hand.
Right.
Yeah.
The quality's bad, right? And so they all go, yeah, the quality's bad. We all agree to that, right? And we didn't
Yeah.
get, and so then we say, okay, you're going to have a chance to redeem yourself. You're going to do the same exact thing, but do it with your dominant hand. I'm only going to give you 15 seconds, though. So now we're doing the same thing, 15 seconds. People write their names, blah, blah, blah. You get to the end of that and you go, okay, so now let's compare. How did it feel? Well, natural. Did any of you have to think about how to spell your own name? No. Did you ever have to think about how to form the letters? No. Now tell me about quality. What's the difference between time 1 and time 2? Second time's a lot better for the overwhelming majority of people, right? Are there exceptions? Yeah. Yes, but they're rare. So you look at those two side by side. Now then the key aspect of it is this, though. How many of you got at least the same number of signatures or more the second time as you did the first time? Every hand in the room goes up, right? And then I say, how many double? And usually about half the room, more or less, half the room raises their hand. Double the number of signatures, better quality in half the time, right?
Yeah.
Every room I've ever done it in, 1 or 2 people say triple, right? Now, some of that is a function of their first one was horrible. They didn't even get 1 signature, right?
I don't think I would
so,
get one.
No, exactly. But so then what I say then is, listen, double the output, higher quality, half the time. Why would you ever in a million years think about trying to do this all the time with your non-dominant hand? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever because of performance, not because it's uncomfortable, not because somebody else told you, not because of your background or your upbringing or anything else, only because of performance, right? And so it sort of dispels this notion that we have to work hard at something in order for it to be good or in order for it to be valuable, right? We have this weird concept, especially in the Western culture, where if you didn't work so hard for it, that somehow it's not good enough or, whatever. And I'm like, look, everything I've ever done in my strengths has felt easy. The work I do on a day-to-day basis with organizations, it's complicated work. It's complex. Not everybody can do it. It's easy for me. Yeah. Right. Because I think like that, because I wake up every single morning thinking about leadership and thinking about how organizations are designed and thinking about what would it look like if we asked this, and this question on a structured interview to help select people who are going to wake up every day thinking about how to do this job better. Right. Yeah. Because I'm obsessed with that, because I'm a total nerd about it. Right. Yeah. It's easy. Right. It's easy. And people are like, oh, well, it shouldn't feel easy and you should have to work. No, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, that's another one, I think, of the myths. I mean, I had somebody who was mad one time. I spoke to a home care conference in New Jersey. And the guy's like, don't the best things in life come from the difficulties, from the challenges, from overcoming? And I was like, no, first of all. And second of all, even if they did, you're going to encounter those challenges. You don't have to make life harder than it is. Yes. Right? Like you said, some people would say, wouldn't it be great, though, if someday I could write with both hands? And then you're like, why? When are you going to be in a situation where it's ever more valuable? Maybe once when you hurt your hand for a little while. Yeah. That's worth a lifetime of struggle and effort to finally get this other hand halfway. But that's what people believe. It's like that the value is in the pain. The value is in the struggle. The value is in the hard work. And if it's easy, you're not doing anything worthwhile.
Well, no, Dave, and if it's easy, anybody could do it. If it was easy, anybody could do it. Right? Yeah. No, it's if you had the talent, you could do it.
It's easy for you.
It's easy for you, right? Yeah. But like, so to continue your point though, like I ask people, I say in that same activity, I go, have any of you ever hurt your hand, your dominant hand, and you had to write with your non-dominant hand? And usually somebody says, yeah. And I say, okay, did you get better at it over the course of the time having to use your non-dominant hand? And they say, yeah. And I say, okay, now when your dominant hand healed, did you start writing with your dominant hand again? And they say, yeah. And I go, why? And they're like, well, because it's my dominant hand, because it's better. It's natural. And I said, well, don't you want to challenge yourself? Don't you want to, isn't the hard work worth it? Right? Like all of those kinds of things. No, because without having to think about it, you're better at doing it this way. than you are even if you had months of practice doing it with the other hand.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to a, a book. I love Audible. I don't know how many people use Audible, but if you're maybe even this is a great one. You know, it used to be I used to work with a nonprofit that would record books for people who were blind or
Mm.
had dyslexia and couldn't read without an audiobook or without Braille in that instance. And Audible now has just, it seems like every book comes out now and is immediately has an audiobook as well because Audible has created this market and made it easy. But the other day they just had a free one and they know what I like. Um, it's an Audible original. It's called Neurodiversity and the Myth of Normal. And it's only like 2.5 hours. And I listened to it with my wife. We're on our way to see Nate Bargatze show in Asheville, North Carolina. Um, and the authors are Kyler Shumway and Daniel Wendler. And I believe it was Kyler, you know, and these guys are 30s, maybe 40s. Um, and Kyler got harassed by his second grade teacher for using his left hand, or his first grade teacher for using his left hand. She would just take it out, put it in his other hand, and tell him to do it the right way. And what's his problem? And why has he got to do it the wrong way? And why does he have to go against the flow? And doesn't he see everybody else is working with their right hand? And he's like, I've never hated school more. I've never hated myself more. I've never hated life more. And this is in our lifetime, Stosh. This is not 300 years ago when people didn't know what germs were. They also had crazy superstitions about left-handedness.
Yeah.
It's like in our lifetime, somebody who was born 20, 30 years ago was told that their weakness was using their left hand and that they'd be a better, more successful person if they used their right hand.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's where people get some of this stuff too, is other people have told me I have to fix this weakness. Other people told me I even have a weakness that I don't have, and I've started to believe that I do.
Yeah. I mean, and Dave, like, one of the things that I would love to, you know, like I want to say out loud for the people who listen to this podcast to hear is it's okay. You have permission. You don't need permission from anyone other than yourself to say to those voices, wherever they came from, whether they're past, present, or anytime in the future, hey, you know what? Go fly a kite. Yeah. I'm going to keep doing it this way because it works for me. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had a similar experience when I was a kid. Like I'm right-handed, but like I hold my pencil like this.
You hold your pen weird.
I hold my pen like this, right? And because it's comfortable for me, it's just the way I've always done it, right? Like, so this is, okay, I've got a pen right here. Like I hold a pen like this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're supposed to.
You do it the wrong way.
You're supposed to hold the pen like this, right? If I hold the pen like this, I look like I write with my non-dominant hand. It's like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And so when I was a kid, they put one of those little triangle rubber things on my pencil and told me, hold your pencil like this. And so I tried it a couple times, being the dutiful kid that I was, right? I've got responsibility in my top 5. I try to do, you know, the right thing.
Right.
It didn't work.
And you think they're right.
And then what happened?
Kid, you don't have the perspective.
No, you don't. And then,
like,
but what happened?
I'm going to fight the patriarchy or something.
But then my natural, who I am, took over. The other part of me took over. And I went, no, forget that. And I just started holding around the rubber thing the way that it works, right? For me. And I've held my pen like that ever since. And I couldn't care less. Now that's a stupid example, right? But the same thing's true in your job. The same thing is true in your relationships. The same thing's true everywhere. Now, does it have to be a negotiation when it's an environment that you care about? Yeah, absolutely. You can't just be like, hey, I'm going to do it this way and screw you if you don't like it. That's not always going to work, right? But sometimes it does. And it can always work, at least in the context of, does it lead to performance, right?
Yeah.
And so if it's not getting in the way of your performance or somebody else's, then it's not a weakness. It doesn't need to be fixed. If you're writing with your left hand and it's perfectly legible and fine, then it doesn't need to be fixed, right?
Yeah.
If you're a direct person and that's not causing anybody else to feel intimidated, then it doesn't need to be fixed. If you're organized and people are calling you, you know, OCD or whatever it is, and that's actually helping the team stay on track and you're a good project manager as a result, that doesn't need to be fixed, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're doing that at home and it's overbearing to everybody else and you're telling people like this is where you have to be at a certain time or whatever, and you're running adults like that and they're getting annoyed, then yeah, you got to back off of that a little bit. You got to negotiate. You got to figure out what's best for the relationship because that's part of performance, right?
But also, that's a relationship you've chosen. And if it's not a good fit and the other person doesn't appreciate the fact that you take charge or take control, or like, because there's plenty of people who would like that same thing, right?
Sure.
Like somebody's like, oh yeah, I mean, I just saw one today. There's all these videos, where people are like, so either the man or the woman always drives, and I sit over here and I don't even know where we're going, and I don't know how much gas we have, and I'm looking at my phone, and I don't have a map, and I don't know when we're supposed to get there, and I'm at the airport, and I don't know I don't have our tickets, and I don't know what our gate is, but they love that other person,
Right.
right? And then meanwhile someone else is like, you're overbearing and whatever, and someone else is like, perfect, then I don't have to do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think that's a good, let's go back to the pen thing for a second, because we had to deal with that. And so part of the message, the imperfectionist is for individuals, but it's also for your relationships, right? And are you willing to give people permission to not fix their weaknesses? And are you not, making weaknesses where there aren't any? So let's go back to the pencil, because I dealt with this with all three of my daughters. So the first one goes to school, and they're like, you're supposed to hold it like this. And for those of you, listening to this, how
Christian
you're
schools,
supposed to.
man, don't send your kids to Christian school. That's the
You're
moral of the
supposed
story.
Don't send your kid to private schools. So you know how you hold it. Look at your hand, unless you got in trouble for it. But you're supposed to hold it between your thumb and your index finger, and then kind of stabilize it with your middle finger. So my first daughter comes in, and she's on the middle finger with it touching the ring finger, right? And they're like, she can't do that. That's no good. And we're like, does she
Wow.
make the letters?
Exactly.
And we just let it go. We let them complain, and then we just didn't do anything about it. And she moved on with her life, and she did great. She has a master's degree now. In case you're wondering, like, is it going to be okay? She's got a master's degree. She's got what she calls a big girl job. She works from home. She's doing great.
Yeah.
The second one comes along, and she goes, ring finger stabilize on the pinky, sort of like Stosh does, for those of you who couldn't see it. And same thing. Oh my gosh, your child is, has some kind of deficiencies intellectually. Then the third one comes along and just grabs it in her fist. like she just grabs it in her fist, and she somehow gets the pinky involved, but really she just grabs it in her fist and just goes for it.
Yeah.
And so every one of them got like progressively worse, and they're all doing great.
Yeah.
And so we have this fear that if we don't fix the weakness, it's all going to turn out bad. But we also have this hope that if we fix the weakness, it's going to be wonderful. And to your point, there's probably not any efficiency to be gained by doing it some different way. There's probably not quality to be gained. There's probably not productivity to be gained. But also, I think the one thing that people miss sometimes is it's not what you can do, it's how it makes you feel. If going into work every day is painful, difficult, exhausting, and frustrating because it requires you to fix all your weaknesses, well, first of all, what's your productivity, quality, efficiency going to be like? But also, is that the life you want? Like, even if you can still get promoted and still get raises and still have outward effectiveness, there's a reason people say my job is sucking the life out of me. There's a reason people say, right, that the reason people dread Monday mornings. There's so like, even if you win externally, you're losing internally, and that's part of this as well. Why wouldn't you want to be in a situation where it was natural, it felt good, it seemed instinctual, you always have had a certain knack for it? So I think that part is really important as well. And I don't know if you address that a little more, the emotional and internal components of being really good at what you do, having it flow, having it come naturally. Did you talk any about that, or have you coached anybody on that kind of side of things?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, and Gallup's got some good research on this. That basically says, like people who report that they get to use their strengths every day are, I don't know what it's like, 3.6 times more likely to report having an excellent quality of life.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
and don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. So like
Yeah.
it's exponentially better when you're focused
Right.
on your strengths. Just about everything gets better. And
Right.
otherwise they wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, you think about it, Gallup's biggest clients are all Fortune 500 companies. And every company in the Fortune 500, I'm here to tell you because I've worked with a lot of them, is about their productivity and their profitability. And some of them do a great job of caring for people and doing things the right way for the right reason as well. But every single one of them is about their bottom line because they're publicly traded companies and their shareholders have expectations for that. And so if they're not doing that, there's going to be big trouble for them and they're going to lose value and there's going to be a lot of problems that come as a result of that. So it is about the both and not the either or. Like you don't have to sacrifice well-being in order to get productivity, and you don't have to sacrifice productivity in your well-being pursuits because
Yeah.
showing up with your strengths, to your point, is life-giving. It and like one of the things we
Well,
used
it
to
is
ask people all
energy
the time.
giving,
Yeah,
which then, so yeah, if you want productivity, if you want efficiency, if you want effectiveness, wouldn't that come when you have an endless supply of interest
yeah,
and energy for that particular thing and a unique, weirdo passion
yeah.
for, that particular thing?
So the tagline for my company is individuals are the cornerstones of organizations, organizations are the cornerstones of communities, and communities are the cornerstones of the world.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because if you people like you and me who are in this space, right? Evangelists for focusing on your strengths and for performing at high levels and all of the stuff that goes along with that. If we can make the difference in an individual's life or in an organization's life, then what the downstream effect of that is communities get better and the world gets better. Because if I
Yeah.
go to work and I'm charged up about what I'm doing, if I have more, then I have more energy when I leave potentially than I did when I started, which is a
Say
crazy
that
thing
again,
to
because
think
I
about.
say that all the time. You have
Yeah,
say that more energy.
you can have more energy at the end of a workday than you did when you started the workday. Why? Because you
That's
get to
so
do
huge.
the things that are the most important to you, that you're the best at, that you lose track of time doing, that you consistently produce near perfect performance at and get great feedback on, right?
Yeah.
And so and that you don't even have to think about in order to be able to produce. And so you have more energy. Then you get home, you're not worn out and you don't go, I need to take a nap or I need to drink or I need to whatever. So before I
Right.
interact with my
I have to
kids or
recover.
like I can go and coach the little league team or I can go
Yeah.
volunteer at my local, VFW or my church or whatever else it is that's important to me, right? And then that community gets stronger because of the energy that got created. And the only thing that was different is you focusing on your strengths and you having
Yeah.
a position that enabled you to do something that was in your quote unquote wheelhouse every single day.
Yeah.
And is there a such thing as 100% of the time you get to do that? Maybe, but it's rare, right?
Right.
But if you can get there 70, 80% of the time, I mean, even if you're only at 30 or 40% of the time right now, which most people aren't, if you could improve that by 10%, what difference would it make to your life? Because
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you it would make a large difference. It would make
Yeah.
a massive difference.
Yeah.
And again, there's good research on that too, just in terms of physical health, like people's cortisol levels and like all this other stress indicators. There's a lot of evidence that says if you're good at your job and you're focusing on your strengths and you're able to function in an area where you're going to be rewarded for those things, that your physical health is actually improved by that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And even if not, your emotional and mental health,
Yeah.
people, you can't question that. And if you question it, just look at the reverse. What happens to your emotional and mental health when you don't like it, when it's a constant battle, when it's a constant fight?
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that Now Discover Your Strengths was so powerful for me is because it comes with um, every book comes with a code where you can take the Strengths Finder assessment. I think now it's called Clifton Strengths. Um, and the way it works is you get all these questions, and it's basically looking at these 34 strengths, these 34 positive characteristics that a person can have. And then it tells you your top five, and you can sort of do something with that, or you can jump on a coaching call with someone from Gallup, and this is what you used to do, and they'll talk you through not just your top five, but the full list, like what's at the bottom, what's at the top, and everything in between. Um, tell us. I want to hear your top five and just a brief explanation of those. Then I'll talk about my top five. Then we'll talk a little bit about um, the assessment. Actually, before we do that, it's time. We're almost 45 minutes in. It's time for Not Sponsored By. So, this is our third episode of the Imperfectionist podcast. And we are not sponsored by, this week, No Bull. So, No Bull is a CrossFit clothing and equipment brand. I love them because they got lots of pink stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see me wearing my pink No Bull sweatshirt. And also, every week we do a shoe of the week. And my shoe of the week is a No Bull pink high top that's so beautiful. I only wear it inside and for my presentations. They have a camo version, pink camo, but it's always sold out, and I can never get it. But these are some of my favorite shoes. What'd you say? Yeah, well, that is one of my weirdo things. I'm 6'6". My shoes, though, only size 12. So I met Emmitt Smith, the famous running back for the Dallas Cowboys, Hall of Famer, a multiple-time Super Bowl winner, and he was five. I'm going to say it wrong, but I'm going to look it up. But he's 5'8", 5'9", and his hands are bigger than mine. He's 5'9", and his hands are bigger than a guy who's 6'6". And then he wears also he wears a size 12, and he is 5'8", 5'9", 5'9". And we also weigh about the same. I'm 6'6", and I weigh the same as a guy who is 5'9". Now he's all muscle. But so this week we are not sponsored by No Bull. If you're looking for cool workout stuff, or if you're one of those people who wears workout stuff when you're not working out, they got some great stuff. I've bought a bunch of these pink shoes for my clients in the past. I got a lot of people running around in some pink No Bull high tops. So that's the shoe of the week, and not sponsored by. Stosh, who are you not sponsored by?
So I actually thought about this differently. So I'll change, because I was actually thinking about it from like this is a place that would never hire you, or like, kind of thing. And I actually thought,
I think it could be whatever you want. These are places that it would be cool if they did sponsor me, but they are not currently sponsoring
no,
me.
I'm not going to go there, because this is actually, I was actually thinking about a client that I got kicked off of because I asked too many questions.
Okay, we're not going there then.
About what was practical. So I'm going to go with Spotify.
Ooh.
And it's because of one of my strengths. So
yeah.
I listen to music probably at least 2 or 3 hours a day, every day. And it's because my mind needs that in order to be able to level off. Like it's my mind is way too active without it being regulated somehow. And it just helps me to figure out, okay, what do I want to think about? What do I want to spend time focused on? And then how do I kind of move in the direction of some sort of progress or opportunity with that. So yeah,
so not sponsored by Spotify.
Yeah, not sponsored by Spotify.
And this podcast is available on Spotify, and we are actually using basically the Spotify podcasting platform to record this. So that's perfect. They are not sponsoring us, but they're listening and they're watching right now. Maybe the algorithms will tell them that that's what they should do. All right. So what are your top 5 strengths? When you took the Strengths Finder, now called, I think, Clifton Strengths, what were your top 5?
So I'm going to give you a hybrid version, because having worked there, I did it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
So the ones I resonate with most strongly are responsibility, belief, intellection, relator, and command.
So give us like a quick sentence on each of those. Like what's the bigger version? I mean, people know what it's like to be responsible, but some of them are a little less clear. Give us a quick explanation of each of those top 5.
Yeah. So responsibility is, I'm going to do whatever I say, period, full stop. Doesn't matter what you put between me and that outcome 100% of the time.
You do what you say, and you're responsible. Yeah. You're reliable.
And it's about relationships, though. It's because I committed to you. It's not just because of the task. Right. So one of the things I coach people on all the time who have responsibility is make more of your commitments public, because you'll follow through on them if you do.
Yeah.
Belief is the theme that's about, like it's about non-negotiables. So there are not tons of things, but 3 or 4 things in my life that I'm absolutely never going to change my mind about. So building on people's strengths is the best way to develop them, is one of those things. So
Yeah.
there's an altruism mission component to that as well. So like being
Sure.
on a mission to help people get better, to develop people, to see the world get better because individuals
Yeah.
and organizations get better. Like that's where belief comes in.
Yeah, we've both worked in nonprofits. We've both volunteered for nonprofits. We've both served on the boards of nonprofits. That's a belief component to that, that there's something worth doing and worth committing to and things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Intellection is the word picture I always uses is like having a crock pot on simmer in your brain at all times. So it's just always on. So,
Yeah.
And the part of it that sounds weird to people, like one of the things I heard when I first worked at Gallup from a coach named Sherry Ehrlich, who actually taught the certification course that I joined and then later started teaching myself,
Yeah.
was talent should sound a little spooky. Like it just
Mm.
seems weird to people who don't have it. And
Well, that's been a theme. We talked about being a little bit of a
absolutely.
weirdo related to that thing. Are you really that
Absolutely.
into it? Are you really that excited? Are you really like that? You're like,
Yeah.
yes.
And for me, intellection is one of those things. Like it always elicits a response when I say this. But I'll be thinking about something at night and then go to sleep, and when I wake up, my brain will have solved it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It will have figured it out, and so I'll wake up, and not always immediately, but like I'll think about the thing that I went to sleep thinking about, and it's like, oh, okay, now I know what to do.
My
Right?
dad
Or I
said
know
that
how to
he would
figure it.
do that with math problems. He studied math in college, and he said if he really got stuck, he'd just look at it right before falling asleep because he'd go do other stuff, but then right before going to sleep, he'd come back to it, look at it, get it in there, go to sleep, and he'd very often kind of wake up and his brain had processed it while he
Yeah.
was sleeping.
Yeah. And it was one of the things that I had a great piece of coaching one time. The first couple of years I worked at Gallup, and I had a coach that told me your reasonable contribution to the world is to think out loud from time to time.
Mm.
Because I take for granted what my brain thinks about, right?
Yeah.
Because it's always on. And so I'm always synthesizing. I'm always creating. I'm always coming up with a new way to approach something. I'm always thinking about a way to ask a question differently or better or whatever, because it just never turns off. And I forget, it's Chip and Dan Heath's curse of knowledge, right? Like I forget
Yeah.
all the things that
It's
I went
become
through,
normal to you. It's
it's
become
absolutely
just
normal,
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, so that's intellection. Relator is the one that would prefer to deepen existing relationships than make new ones. So if you invite me to your cocktail party, you should stay with me the whole time, because if you introduce me to a new person and walk away, I'm going to go, hey, nice to meet you. And then after that, I'm going to be pretty lost because woo is another one of the StrengthsFinder themes. It's in my bottom 5. I'm
Yeah.
not an extroverted
That's
person, not my
Yeah.
favorite thing.
Yeah.
So, and then
Now let's stop there for a second,
Okay.
because that is the freak factor, and that's the one place that I diverge with Gallup, is that the reality is, for most strengths, being like that means not being like something else, right? And so for those people who don't know, woo, I mean, it's a word. It means something to be able to woo people, to have charisma, to be able to connect with people, to want to do it, to enjoy having all sorts of small interactions with new people and strangers. The person who's super pumped about the cocktail party oftentimes has woo. And so the reality is, I'm tall, I'm not short. That's how that kind of stuff works. And that's the only time that I disagree with Gallup, is they say there's no connection between strengths and weaknesses. But the reality is, when you really want this and you do this and you prefer this, you don't want and don't prefer and don't naturally do its opposite. And some of those things are opposites.
Yeah. So the reason why they say that is because fewer than 20% of the items on StrengthsFinder are scored ipsatively, which is a nerd word for opposites, right? Yeah. But it's also possible, that makes it possible to have any combination of top 5.
That's
so
right.
I've seen a lot of people who have woo and relator in their top 5, and they're just relationship machines, right? But if you have them polarized in a sequence, and some themes polarize more than others, right? Yeah. So like if you've got strengths nerds listening to the podcast, then like themes like restorative and maximizer are almost never together, for example.
Yeah.
Right. and command and empathy, or command and harmony, also rarely
Right.
together. And so,
Right.
my last one is
Right.
command. I know that's a theme that you have as well.
Yeah.
Empathy and harmony are both low for me. I'm married to somebody who has them both,
Yeah.
right? Which is great because
Which
we've
is the
got
reason you're still
coverage.
married.
It's also the reason why I'm still alive. So, yeah. So, but yeah, command's the one that's just comfortable taking charge and is going to
Yeah.
be direct and say what needs to be
Well, and
said.
uncomfortable not taking charge and uncomfortable not being in charge. Again, that's one of those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, it's going to look different for everybody, but the core part of that is that if there's a vacuum, I'm going to jump into it, and if there's
Yeah.
a shortage somehow, or if a person who is leading isn't the kind of person who ought to be leading, or doesn't engender respect, or isn't doing it well enough, or whatever, then I'm going to have a really hard time not moving into that space or not challenging that leader or whatever. But
Yeah.
it also surfaces when you're talking about sitting in a meeting and challenging whatever's being said, and being the person that will say things that other people only think.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I can't tell you how many times in my life I've left a meeting and had someone walk up to me and go, "Thank you so much for bringing that up."
Yeah.
Because everybody thought it, but no one was willing to say it out loud except me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's that kind of, Gallup uses the word presence a lot. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
even if the person doesn't have the title, you kind of know they're in charge. That's what command does.
Yeah. Good. So that's helpful. And I guess we should say we're not sponsored by Gallup.
Nope.
But I definitely recommend doing the Strengths Finder, again, now called Clifton Strengths. Check that out. It's one of the most valuable ones I've ever done, and just the mindset is extremely valuable. I still remember mine, and I'll talk about them in a second. And my Amplify assessment, which I recently created, correlates with the Strength Finder assessment and with DISC and MBTI and other ones that we'll talk about on other episodes. So if it tells you you're a chaotic creator, then it says this is like this on Strengths Finder. If it tells you you're a systematic organizer, it tells you, and that's like this particular strength on Strengths Finder. And so if you've done the Strengths Finder assessment, I'm not trying to come along and tell you something different about yourself. I'm just trying to build on that and add to that and help you with it. So my top 5 are achiever. I like to accomplish things, get things done. It's part of the reasons I run 100-mile races. It's one of the reasons I'm a motivational speaker, because I'm an activator. I like to get other people started. I like to start. I like to get things going. Input, I love to learn. I love to read. I love to listen. To Stash's point from earlier, it's almost an obsession. It's almost a need. If I'm going to sit down and work, I have to turn on music. I have to turn on the TV. I have to turn on a video or a podcast. I don't just work in a complete vacuum. If I'm going for a walk, I'm listening to a podcast. If I'm going for a run, I'm listening to music or a podcast. But oftentimes, audiobooks and podcasts, I'm learning. I'm interested, right? I'm not just jamming out. I want to take in information. I'm constantly saying, I think I heard somewhere. I think I saw somewhere. I think and that's why we're going to have a book of the week. That's why we're going to have a quote of the week. All of these books you see here are books that I've read, and this is just a small sampling of that. And that's why I'm, running over in the middle of the podcast to go grab some other book that I listened to on audio. And some parts were so meaningful. I'm like, I need to get that in physical form as well, so I can highlight it and find it and see it and reference it. So input is another one. Ideation. I love ideas, which oftentimes comes through the input. I love creating ideas. I love hearing ideas. I love talking about ideas. That's why a podcast is a good fit for me. And my last one is command. I love to be in charge. For my thing, I really don't need to be in charge of other people. I just want to be in charge of myself. I really value freedom, autonomy, flexibility. I was always in trouble as a kid because I wouldn't do what I was told. I don't want to be told what to do. I want to do what I want. And that doesn't make me a hardened criminal. It just means I want to have control over my life and my daily activities. Some of my driving is probably borderline criminal, and I'm not ashamed of that. And I'll take the ticket and pay it when it happens. And I think that's what I want to end with, Stash. Like for me as a professional speaker, I take the input, the idea, I take massive input. I turn it into a collage of ideas. I synthesize it. I run my own business and I achieve these big goals because I'm an achiever. I'm a motivational speaker because I'm an activator, because I'm energized and I help energize other people and I'm passionate about who I am and what I do. And then command, I run my own business, I run my own life. And I command the room when I'm up in front of it, right? And I get people's attention, and I'm happy to be up front. I'm happy to be out front. I'm happy to be on stage. So, to your point from earlier, I think one of the other reasons people are trying to fix weaknesses and not trying to mine, as you said, their own strengths is they're like, don't pigeonhole me. That's not all I have. It's like, no, there's an infinite. Because when you take achiever and add it to activator and add it to input, it add it to ideation and add it to command, they multiply each other and they can form just about anything. Public speaker isn't the only outlet for that. Entrepreneur isn't the only outlet for that. That's just my particular one. That adds to 6'6". That adds to life experiences. That adds to whatever. So I think that's one thing that people worry about is, don't pigeonhole me. I'm not pigeonholed. I'm doing every day what I love to do. So tell us a little bit, um, tie it together for us. I'm sure people heard it a little bit, but tie together like what you do for a living and what you do in your life with your top five. Show us some of the, Freak Factor is all about alignment, finding the right fit between who you are and where you are. Talk us through a little bit of how your top five align with the way you live your life and the way you do your work.
Yeah. So I'm obsessed with making the world better. I, I, I don't want to be part of the world if it's not going to keep getting better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And my way of helping that to become more true is to work with individuals and organizations.
Yeah,
And so I am going to be I'm obsessed with my clients, right?
yeah,
Like my biggest client is a Fortune 500 company. I bought stock in their company
yeah.
because I was like, if we're not gonna put our money where our mouth is, then what's the point? You
Yeah,
know?
you believe in what you do and you believe in the people you're doing it with and doing it
Absolutely.
for. Yeah, yeah,
And I'm going to be completely committed to your outcomes. So
yeah,
I am obsessed with what you're trying to accomplish and how can I accelerate that? How can I come alongside that? How can I deepen our relationship, relator, responsibility toward the end of you performing well, but also impacting the entire community that you're in. So, same client that I'm talking about, they're the largest job provider in their region outside of their healthcare system, right?
yeah,
So, if things are going poorly there, they're going poorly in an entire community,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And so, again, from a mission perspective, I'm like, like a whole region of the country, a whole region of the state can get better if we're doing the right kinds of things in practice. And
yeah,
so I'm going to say things as a result that are going to sometimes be uncomfortable. And I'm going to ask questions that are going to make us think and that are going to push us and challenge us because that's what I'm getting paid to do. And I feel like I'm cheating you if I'm not doing those things. And my there's going to be a component of my brain that is dedicated to the issues, the problems, the ideas, the possibilities that exist in your world. If you're an individual that I'm coaching, or if you're an organization that I'm working with, it's going to be on all the time. And I'm going to have 3 days after we have a conversation, I'm going to have an idea about, hey, I've been thinking about this. That
yeah. You're not just
here's
always
what you
thinking;
talked
you're
about it.
always thinking about their needs and their
Right.
concerns and how you might be able to help them. Yeah,
Absolutely. And so it's
yeah,
that constellation for me is how do I devote my thought life, my actions, my relationship posture towards you, my willingness to do things that other people wouldn't do or do them differently than other people would do them toward the common ground that we're trying to create, which is performance for the business and people being treated the way people ought to be treated so that they have more energy at the end of the day than they did at the beginning of the day, the overwhelming majority of the time. And the world gets better as a result of that.
yeah, yeah. I love it. Well, we have to wrap it up for today. I'm almost certain Stosh will be back if I have anything to say about it, as a guest. Maybe even more serious than that. Stosh, we should say this show is not co hosted by Stosh, but maybe it will be someday. Um, so I have about 8,000 other questions that I would like to ask him. We do wrap up, Stosh, by telling where we're going to be. So I'm going to be speaking for a group called Entrepreneurs Organization Calgary, speaking to a group of entrepreneurs and their family members and their business associates, talking about Amplify, which is the new assessment that shows you how to turn up the volume on who you are instead of trying to turn it down. And I'm excited about that new keynote that I do and the assessment that's related to it. I'm also speaking for a group in the Chapel Hill area called Institute for Defense and Business. So they work with people in the military, primarily involved in the logistics side of all the branches of the military. I've even had somebody from the Space Force in my group. And they are learning how to connect what they do to the businesses that supply what the military needs in order to operate. And I go in and talk to them about the stuff we've been talking about, how to build on your strengths, tap into who you are, stop trying to fix your personality or change your personality, and those kind of things. And I'm talking to them the first week of June. So those aren't open public events. That's not why we're sharing it. But anything you've got coming up, Stosh, any trips or any presentations coming up for your work?
No, I tomorrow I'm going to be at an improv marathon.
Oh yeah, you've
performing
been
at
doing
an
a ton of
improv
improv
marathon.
lately. Yeah.
Yeah, so my team in the western suburb of
Well,
Chicagoland.
that is something people can come to. So yeah, give them the details. Yeah. Give them
Yeah,
the details.
so I perform with a team called Bicycle Fish Parade at Westside Improv in Wheaton, and we're on the schedule like usually twice a month. Tomorrow we're on 3 times, or we're doing a 12-hour improv marathon from noon to midnight. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, improv's been super fun. It's also a really great way to think about strengths and how people use them, because any strength can be used in that space, because you're basically just playing a character and whatever. So that's good fun. I will say out loud, so in tune with my responsibility theme, I will say this out loud because I've been poor at it lately, but where I will also be is recording more episodes of the Insubordinate podcast
That's what I was just about to say. So yeah, tell them about that.
Yeah, so the subtitle of that is Better Workplaces, Better Worlds. So just talk about different things that are work related, mostly things that are work related, but that get into well-being and some of the things like that. I talked a lot about soccer and the Women's World Cup and the Luis Rubiales thing when it was happening. So there's some current event stuff in there, and just kind of how that applies to our lives and our organizations. But
yeah, he needs to add some new episodes, but this is not like an old podcast. He was putting them out through late 2023. It's called Insubordinate. I tried to show it on the screen there. It didn't work super good. We'll have to come up with a better system for that. But it's called Insubordinate, Better Workplaces, Better World. I get mine on Apple Podcasts. Is it also on Spotify, Stosh?
Yeah,
Any
it's
other
everywhere.
places?
Everywhere you go.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm not sponsored by Spotify, but it is available there.
Stosh is not a co-host. We are not sponsored by Gallup. We are not sponsored by Spotify, and we are not sponsored by No Bull. Stosh, any other things? We're going to definitely do future episodes together, unless you just shoot me down.
Nope, looking forward to it.
Any other any closing? You had that great quote to start. Don't try to put in what was left out. Try to draw out what was left in. Any last words of wisdom for people who are listening? They're still on the fence. This goes too much against what they've been told their whole lives. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap it up?
So one of the things I say a lot, and I have said for a long time, is that a lot of this is about permission. So it's about permission to be more of who you are, less of who you're not, and then extend to as many other people as you can that same latitude. So that permission starts with you. And in so many cases, the only person who needs to give you permission for that is you. But hopefully the people around you that care about you the most will give you that same permission. And hopefully you give them that same permission as well, because believe me, I mean, I've been married 26 years. I've been doing strengths work for almost that long. That is the key to interacting and relating in just about any relationship. It's permission. It's you be you. And I will get out of the way when it's necessary. And when you're doing amazing things that I don't understand and can't figure out, I'm not going to say anything about it other than thank you. I'm
Yeah.
just going to stay, you know what, no problem. And I could tell you a million stories about that. But we try to turn mountains, we try to turn molehills into mountains in those spaces, especially relationally. It doesn't make sense. So permission to be more of who you are, less of who you're not, and extend that same to other people is really the
Yeah.
key to it.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I didn't plan this. That's why it's a podcast, so I don't have to. But the big part of Freak Factor, the framework is the first part is think differently, and which includes things like acceptance and appreciation, which is what we've been talking about. Don't try to fix it, because if you accepted it, you wouldn't try to fix it. If you appreciated it, why would you want to fix it? Because it's awesome. You would want more of it. And then that's the second half, which is amplify. And that's why the assessment is called amplify. But the second half of Freak Factor, the behave differently, is turn up the volume on who you are, and then also get out of situations that don't allow you, right? Be more of who you are and less of who you're not. That's so powerful. But I also think you made a good point there. We say things like productivity and stuff like that, but this also applies not just to your career, but to your relationships, to your parenting, and
Yep.
to your non-work activities as well. If your non-work activities could fuel you, you'd have more energy when you went to work. If your relationships were fueling you, you'd have more energy when you weren't at work.
Yeah. And one of the
And so,
worst myths in the world is I'm different at work than I am at home. No, you're not.
mm,
You're the exact same person with the exact same strengths and the exact same tendencies and the exact same desires. You just apply them differently. That's it.
and this is why we need to talk more, because that's the biggest one. When I have people do assessments live, they'll say, do you want my work personality or my home personality? And we don't have time for that today. You have work behaviors
Yep.
and home behaviors that might be different, but your personality isn't different at work. You're just acting differently. And then again, that has a cost. If you have to be someone you're not at work, that has a cost. And then you go home and you're exhausted because you had to put on a show all day.
Yep.
But you didn't become an organized person because you have to act organized at work. Organized people like to organize. They're energized by organization and they enjoy the process of organization. They might even procrastinate valuable activities in order to spend their time organizing. That's how much they love it.
Yeah. They can't help it.
So, yeah. So you don't become that person at work. You just act like that person at work. Sometimes, unfortunately, in contradiction to who you actually are. We're going to have to devote a whole thing to that. So this is Stosh Walsh, one of the coolest and most helpful people on earth. One of my best friends, and STOSHWALSH, Stosh Walsh, constant organization. Organizational development, right? Constant
Yep.
organizational development. You can find him online. The Insubordinate podcast. Definitely check it out. But if he doesn't put out more Insubordinate podcast episodes, there's already 24, so there's plenty of catching up for you to do. I know when I do a podcast, I go back and I listen. I'm on one right now that has 202-hour episodes, and I'm already 50 in because I get obsessed and I got to go all the way through. But even if Stosh doesn't do more Insubordinate episodes, we're gonna co-opt him, and we're just going to invite him to so many of these that he gives up on his own stupid podcast and does, or it'll happen in reverse. I'll be like, oh boy, I need to go on this. I need to become the co-host of the Stosh podcast, the Stosh Cast. Maybe that's what we need to do. All right.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us. We went way over time, but hey, this is the Imperfectionist podcast, and there really is no time that it has to be. And if you're still listening, we hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time on the Imperfectionist podcast with David Rendell, and this time, Stosh Walsh.